In The Long Loneliness, Day speaks at length about the feelings of love and gratitude that overcame her after the birth of her daughter Tamar, and how that deep joy and peace led her to God. Many of her friends asked her why this desire of God led her to join a church, why she could not simply worship God in her own way, on her own. Day knew even before her daughter was baptized that the call to draw closer and closer to God was also a call to draw closer to God's children. My very experience as a radical, my whole makeup, led me to want to associate myself with others, with the masses, in loving and praising God, she said. Later, she wrote, "We cannot love God unless we love each other. And to love, we must know each other. We know him in the breaking of bread, and we know each other in the breaking of bread, and we are not alone anymore." The call to God was always a call to community, a call to participate in the communion of saints. Day knew herself to be surrounded by saints, both the official saints of the church and the humble, hidden figures like Mrs. Barrett, her childhood neighbor, whose intimate awareness of God's presence awed Day as a girl. Day picketed St. Joseph to pay overdue bills for the House of Hospitality and wrote lovingly about the disciples of Jesus as if they were her own dear friends. Prince by Fritz Eichenberg and Ari Bethune, featured in The Catholic Worker, emphasized the closeness of saintly men and women from the liturgical calendar. Holiness is always close at hand if we know where to look. In Thérèse's lifetime, those closest to her, Leonie, Pauline, Marie, and Celine, were perhaps the only people who had an inkling that their little sister was a saint. But after her death, Thérèse's reputation as a holy teacher grew quickly. The speed at which the church beatified and canonized her was literally unparalleled. Pope Pius XI declared Thérèse to be blessed in 1923 and named her a saint 2 years later, only 28 years after Thérèse's death in 1897. How are saints canonized in the church? Day asks. In a sense, when we are in a state of grace, when there is no mortal sin on our souls, we are all saints. A holy and practical Monsignor in Paris once said that 2 things were necessary to make a saint: money and miracles. And Saint Thérèse sent both. If she wished her way to be known, if she wished her message to be heard, it was her responsibility to provide both. Miracles came quickly. Thérèse had promised that she would spend her time in heaven assisting those who remained on earth. Interestingly, when Day describes the miracles attributed to Thérèse, she doesn't count only the miraculous healings which go into official canonization files. Day names unexpected moments of God's provision as miracles. When orders of apostolic sisters prayed through the intercession of Thérèse, funds appeared to pay off mortgages for their schools and hospitals. Money with which to offer the works of mercy to the poor is a miracle, something that Day knew well from her years of the worker. Thérèse may have been one of God's hidden, anonymous saints in her time on earth, but by the middle of the 20th century, she was a household name among Catholics. So many books have been written about Saint Thérèse, books of all kind too, so why, I ask myself again, have I written one more? Day pondered. Day wrote this book for the worker, for the common man and woman among the masses whose witness of ordinary faithfulness and perseverance had drawn her into the church. The Vatican had officially canonized Thérèse, but before that, it was the worker, the common man, who first spread her fame by word of mouth. It was the masses who first proclaimed her a saint. It was the people. When we think of the masses, we think of waves of the sea, of forests, of fields of wheat, all moved by the Spirit which blows where it listeth. When we think of the people, we think of the child at school, the housewife at her dishpan, the mother working, the mother sick, the man traveling, the migrant worker, the craftsman, the factory worker, the soldier, the rich, the bourgeois, the poor in tenements, the destitute man in the streets. To a great extent, she made her appeal to all of these. These ordinary men and women love Thérèse because she is a sister to them. She too was ordinary. She was just good, good as the bread which Normans bake in huge loaves, and which makes up a large part of their diet. She compares to the great saints as cider compares with wine, others might complain. But the world itself has canonized her. It is the common people who have taken her to their hearts, Day wrote. In this book, addressed to the common worker, Day presents us with the social message of Saint Thérèse. John Cavadini, in the afterword, refers to it as a text of the present moment, which happens to be written in the past. Day wrote during the anxious years of nuclear tensions between the United States and the USSR, on the heels of 2 world wars which had seen millions of soldiers and civilians wasted as cannon fodder in the trenches, in concentration camps, and in the ruined cities of Europe and Japan. Human life seemed, to so many people, cheap. Human dignity seemed like a cruel joke in light of so much destruction. In the present, the nuclear threat has only increased. The United States and Russia have developed nuclear arsenals that dwarf the weaponry of the past century, and they're joined in this stockpiling by China, France, the United Kingdom, Pakistan, India, Israel, and North Korea. Our world bristles with warheads that are capable of ending what we know as civilization. In addition to all of this, we now know a rapidly changing climate presents another existential threat to our human family and to the other creatures with whom we share our planet. I don't think it's unreasonable to ask how we may still hope in the midst of all this. Day acknowledges these fears, but she also saw clearly the danger of allowing a sense of despair and futility to push us out of public life and into private corners of isolation, ruled by political and spiritual apathy. She asks us to consider instead the counter-argument of the little way. What stands out in Thérèse's life, Day asks? Her holiness, of course, and the holiness of her entire family. That is not an ordinary thing in this day of post-war materialism, delinquency, and all those other words which indicate how dissatisfied the world of the West is with its economy of abundance, while the world of the East sits like Lazarus at the gates of Dives. With government becoming stronger and more centralized, the common man feels his ineffectiveness. When the whole world seems given over to preparedness for war and the show of force, the message of Thérèse is quite a different one. Thérèse Martin's little way is a restoration of human dignity because it is a restoration of human agency and responsibility. Day's anarchism, the anarchism of the Catholic worker, is based on taking personal responsibility for the needs of our brothers and sisters, and in Thérèse, she finds a companion who can assure us that our efforts mean something. Cavadini echoes this claim, noting that Day sees in Thérèse's little way the defiance of the system, of any system that reduces human agency to a mere outworking of itself. Technocratic regimes seem relentlessly effective in degrading the planet and intimidating any individual initiative to the contrary as ineffective, foolish, and weak. Does it seem foolish to protest the construction of another oil pipeline, another prison, or the continued stockpiling of nuclear warheads? Perhaps. There is only so much that is within our capabilities in light of these enormous geopolitical systems. However, Day reminds us, Thérèse speaks to our condition. Is the atom a small thing? And yet, what havoc it has wrought. Is her little way a small contribution to the life of the Spirit? It has all the power of the spirit of Christianity behind it. It is an explosive force that can transform our and the life of the world once put into effect. We might be capable of very little in the eyes of the world, but God can work miracles with the raw materials of our small initiatives. This is truly the social message of the little way. Day writes, "The seeds of this teaching are being spread, being broadcast, to be watered by our blood perhaps, but with a promise of harvest. God will give the increase. At a time when there are such grave fears because of the radioactive particles that are sprinkled all over the world by the hydrogen bomb tests, and the question is asked, what effect are they going to have on the physical life of the universe? One can state that this saint of this day is releasing a force, a spiritual force, upon the world to counteract that fear and that disaster. We know that one impulse of grace is of infinitely more power than a cobalt bomb. Thérèse has said, all is grace. Day leaves us with eschatological hope in the present era of continuing preparation for nuclear war, hope that we can carry with us in this time of climate peril. Destruction is not inevitable. Our efforts for life, for hope, for a future, both in this world and in the next, mean something to God, who sees us and loves us. We can trust in that love, just as Thérèse did. Much has been made over Day's quip, "Don't call me a saint. I don't want to be dismissed so easily." But she was also fond of quoting French novelist Léon Blois, who wrote, "The only real sadness, the only real failure, the only great tragedy in life is not to become a saint." In 1960, when Thérèse was published, Day would not have known that 60 years later her own cause for canonization would be underway. But she did know that when she died, she would go on to join the great cloud of witnesses, the masses of God's people in the next life. For Day, this would have meant joining a gathering of friends, of brothers and sisters whom she already knew and loved. The saints felt close to her because Day had spent her life imitating them and striving for holiness. So much of what Day writes about Thérèse is now, 60 years later, true of Day herself. Of Thérèse, Day asks, what did she do? She practiced the presence of God, and she did all things, all the little things that make up our daily life and contact with others, for his honor and glory. She wrote her story, and God did the rest. God and the people. God chose for the people to clamor for her canonization. The practice of the presence of God defined Day's life, as it did Thérèse's, and what that ultimately means is living in the awareness that love matters, and that love is much more real than material power. Day wrote that Thérèse offered herself as a victim of love, which Cavadini takes to mean that Thérèse's faith placed her in solidarity with all that the system, any system, rejects: the criminals, the useless, the despised, those who have rejected even love itself, those whom heaven must reject if it is imagined according to the inflexible justice of the system, where not even a drop of mercy could then be imagined to reside. Day spent her life working for a world in which it is easier to be good. Thérèse did as well, in a very different context. The spiritual and corporal works of mercy they offered to the poor form a counter-narrative to the logic of the system, which rewards greed over generosity, violence over peacemaking, isolation over communion, and fear over hospitality. The logic of love, God's economy, is not the system. In God's economy, all is grace, and grace is offered prodigally to all comers, especially to the poor. The criminals, the useless, the despised, the offscourings of the earth are beloved of God, and they were beloved of Thérèse and beloved of Day.